I'm Mike Chisel and will be chairing today's webinar, which is titled Near Sourcing, a New Opportunity for Apparel Firms. I'm delighted to be joined by Leonie Barry, Managing Editor of Just Style. Leonie will be presenting the first of today's sessions, looking at the challenges and opportunities of moving apparel manufacturing closer to markets in the US and Western Europe. I'm also delighted to welcome Judy Gnadig, Director of Strategic Projects at Lectra Fashion. Lectra is sponsoring today's event and is a world leader in integrated technology solutions dedicated to industries using soft materials. The fashion sector is one of its major markets, and Lectra supplies integrated technology solutions and related services to help companies improve their competitiveness and respond to market challenges. Lectra has over 40 years experience with more than 23,000 global customers. Judy will be talking later about the role of technology in bringing control back closer to home. I'm now going to hand you over to Leonie Barry, who will begin today's webinar. So over to you, Leonie.
Thanks, Mike, and thank you to everyone who's joining us today. After decades of shifting production offshore, clothing retailers, brands, and importers are now talking about increasing the amount they source closer to home. Reshoring, onshoring, nearshoring, close-shoring, call it what you will, it's a topic that's been gaining momentum on both sides of the Atlantic over the past year. But how much of this talk is purely anecdotal? What evidence is there to support any shift? And why is it happening now? Like anything to do with our industry, there are no easy answers. But today I'm going to discuss some of the trends that we're seeing. In the US and UK, a lot of the noise over the past year or so has been about onshoring, with brands and retailers talking about putting more production to domestic suppliers. A very quick snapshot of a few who are doing this includes fashion retailer Topshop, which says it's increased the number of British factories it uses by 20% in the past year to 47, although this is still a drop in the ocean compared with its overseas supply base. Topshop's homegrown campaign includes Made in Britain labels, shown here on its website. The UK's biggest department store retailer, John Lewis, says 13% of its own brand factories are in the UK. It works with 137 British suppliers and sold more than £465 million worth of UK-made products last year. It also highlights products with a Made in UK symbol. And clothing retailer Marks & Spencer is playing on its British heritage. Excuse me, the slides were not working there. Clothing retailer Marks & Spencer is playing on its British heritage by using British fabrics in its Savile Row-inspired tailoring, although it should also be pointed out the line is made in China. It's a similar story in the US, where the likes of everyone from American Apparel to Brooks Brothers are talking up their homemade credentials. The domestic sourcing debate is being driven to some extent by national and political pressure on businesses to do their bit to support local skills and bring back jobs. And it's not hard to see why, with unemployment in the UK and US hovering at around 8%. Over in the US, there was a national outcry when Ralph Lauren's Team USA uniforms for the Olympics opening ceremony were found to be made in China. And job creation has been a major focus of the presidential election campaign. The current administration wants to double exports by 2015. It's proposed tax cuts for US businesses and wants to see 1 million new manufacturing jobs created in the next 4 years. There's also the Make It in America plan to support bills that get America working. And the US Department of Commerce is taking a more high-profile role at events like the Sourcing at Magic trade show to encourage companies to buy more from the Americas. But there are also other issues at play which make sourcing close to home an interesting option. Across the supply chain, we're seeing a rise in both costs and uncertainty in countries that have traditionally been low cost and reliable. Wages are rising around the world, with hikes of 15 to 20% a year in China alone, Oil and freight costs are going up, raw material and fibre prices are volatile, and labour and political unrest is causing disruption. At the same time as all this is going on, retailers are faced with soft sales and pressure to improve profit through faster turnaround, lower markdowns and lower operating costs, which means they're reluctant to commit to the large volumes they would have done in the past, instead looking for more frequent replenishment, smaller batch sizes and flexible supply chains. And of course, consumer confidence continues to be weak, with shoppers' budgets under pressure from things like higher food and energy prices. So it's easy to see the appeal of bringing some manufacturing back closer to where the goods are sold. Among the benefits for retailers and brands are easier communication for speed and problem solving, quicker time to market for fast reaction to fashion trends, and less travel and transportation. Smaller batch sizes and lower inventories also have the potential to boost the bottom line, with faster replenishment of bestsellers and mid-season top-ups helping lift sales and lower markdowns. There's also the realization that the true cost of a garment incorporates everything from labour to raw materials, transportation and import duties. But whether this translates to a boost in domestic manufacturing remains to be seen. Despite all the noise about sourcing in the US and UK, our research shows it's unlikely to translate into a rush of business for firms based here, not least because domestic manufacturing in these two countries is a shadow of what it used to be. Challenges include a lack of fabric and raw material suppliers, a lack of capacity for large-scale production, high wages, a shortage of skilled workers. There's also the issue that domestic sourcing is a low priority for many buyers who have spent decades building relationships with suppliers overseas. When it comes to the number of workers, taking examples from these two tables, you can see the UK has fallen by more than 2/3 in just over a decade, from 268,000 to 91,000. And most of these jobs are now in design, management and logistics. In the US, it's a similar story, with the number of industry workers nearly halving to 601,000 in the 9 years to 2011. When it comes to near-sourcing options, of course firms have a much wider choice than the markets where their products will be sold, as we can see from this table. Depending on where garments are made, near-sourcing options for those needing fast turnaround times include onshoring, which basically means making garments in the domestic market. So for the UK, that means the UK. For the US, that means the US. Then there's partner shoring. Garments, fabric or yarn made in EU member countries move freely from one another, and they do this surprisingly quickly. Garments can leave a factory warehouse in Romania on a Friday afternoon and be in London or Frankfurt before the start of business on Monday. For many buyers in Western Europe, partner shoring is the best compromise between the speed of onshoring and the low costs of sourcing in Asia. And then we have nearshoring, which probably dominates fast response sourcing in most Western countries. Both European and US buyers are surrounded by a ring of low-cost suppliers whose business is based on a range of customs rules and free trade agreements. For Europe, this includes Turkey, the non-EU Balkan countries, and those in the East and Southern Mediterranean. And for the US, the choice includes Mexico, DR-CAFTA countries, Haiti, Colombia, and Peru. In the US, for example, the DR-CAFTA region was the second largest supplier last year, supplying 17.1% of the clothes sold. However, when it comes to numbers on who's buying what and where, the trends are being blurred by an overall drop in the amount of clothing being bought just now. The fact is that in the first 6 months of 2012, buyers in the EU and US bought less clothing than the year before, and the quantities being bought near shore fell roughly in line with the fall in garments bought overall. If you look at the source of apparel on sale last year, you can see domestic production in the US accounts for just 0.9% of the number of garments bought by consumers, and that's down from about 20% in 2005. Within the EU15, the share is larger, but it also fell, accounting for 21% of all garments bought, this being down from 33% in 2005. But within this, there are huge differences from one country to another, with Italy making around 76% of the garments sold, but France, the UK and Germany making less than 5% of clothes on sale. Saying all that though, the US sources around 1/3 from its neighbours in the Americas, while the EU's neighbours accounted for around 21%. So the combined figures for both on and nearshoring show local production accounts for a significant 28.5% of US sourcing and 41.1% of that in the EU. But having said that, it's also worth pointing out that China's still the single predominant player, with a share of about 1/3 of all garments supplied into both the US and EU. But that's not to say continuing domestic decline is inevitable. There will be those for whom cachet, heritage, unique skills and craftsmanship, control or speed to market matter enough for domestic production to make commercial sense, especially for niche and luxury products, as well as small runs. But when it comes to price-sensitive volume garment production, most retailers and brands will continue to put their labour-intensive manufacturing in low-wage countries, whether in Asia, Eastern Europe or Central America, for the foreseeable future. And of course, the evidence may yet emerge to suggest that domestic apparel production is gaining momentum. Just this week, a report released in the US showed that last year, the number of pieces of apparel made in the US rose by 11.1%, and that for the first time ever, import penetration in the US apparel market fell slightly, although this was still to 97.7%. Which means that now, more than ever before, firms need a balanced sourcing strategy, but one that takes a truly global view of potential sourcing areas and might just include garments made on their own doorsteps. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Judy Gnadig, who will talk about the role of technology in bringing back control closer to home.
Okay, well thank you Leonie. Good afternoon everyone. This next part of today's webinar will focus on the role of technology in enabling and supporting the apparel supply chain to be closer to retail. So as Leonie has explained, I mean, even if the statistics are not showing a major increase in the amount of sourcing closer to home, this is definitely something that's starting to happen again in the UK and the USA. So in a sense, we can say there's noise and there's some activity. But in addition to changes in manufacturing as an outright activity, we at Lectra are seeing how brands and retailers are leveraging technology to take back control of their product development processes. So let's take a look at that in a bit more detail. This afternoon, I'll cover some examples within the different domains of the supply chain, starting with design and CAD, and then I'll look at the heart of product development with product lifecycle management, or PLM as it's usually referred to. And finally, we'll have some examples within the manufacturing process. But let's begin by looking a bit more at the reasons why technology is becoming more important. So today, companies want to take back control of their brands and products to more closely manage and influence their supply chains. They know that this can result in greater efficiencies and profits. And to achieve this, they need to better manage costs and the product development process as a whole. Continued changes in consumer demand encourage this shift, in particular the strong desire for frequent new in-fashion items, high and sustainable quality and fit expectations, and affordable prices. The answer to such demand is not simply to design and offer a better product in the right size, colour, and at the right time and place, but companies also had to rethink how they were managing their supply chains. So how does this translate within the supply chain? Companies found themselves having to introduce shorter development cycles because they had to provide many more products that could be managed from the brand centre and collaboratively. More companies started to treat the design and product development processes as one, no longer taking a function-by-function approach, but they tried to better understand the dependencies and the synergies within the different functions and the importance of collaboration, and asking designers to manage or work as a team with pattern and quality technologists. But to achieve this, the management needed visibility of real-time data to make faster, more on-time decisions, and also importantly to better manage costs. And there was also a desire to move away from this huge dependency on China. Companies wanted to have options to produce closer to home. And in order to do that, they needed to have access to the information that would help them make those decisions. So let's take a look at some examples within the design and pattern making functions. When we talk about design, we often forget that it's most often a design team who deliver product collections, and that most designers need to collaborate first and foremost with other designers or members of a design team involved in textile design or trend management, storyboarding or colour management. And these designers are often not in the same office or even the same location, making it difficult to update and share within the same team. So the use of collaborative design technology not only helps designers, wherever they may be, share information, but also reduce the time they spend on non-value-added administrative tasks, in turn making a more efficient use of their time. The design function has also become much wider and involves the designers working much more closely with others, such as I mentioned earlier, pattern specialists and quality managers, to ensure that products turn out as they planned. So the wider role that designers have, being involved in managing these activities such as fit and quality control, has to be facilitated, ideally through collaborative technology, giving the designers with the pattern technologists, with the quality technologists, the opportunity to share the same information in real time. And in addition to involving design more in the fit process, companies have gone further and are actually choosing, again, to define and manage their fit blocks from their headquarters or their own regional sourcing offices. And fit being instrumental, of course, in the quality of a brand, consumers looking for brand standardization. This was one of the key aspects of design and product development that companies knew that they had to own and manage effectively themselves. So it's one of the key areas that, in a sense, has been taken back from the mass offshoring approach that happened in the past 15-20 years. But very importantly, designers also can be involved in virtual prototyping with pattern technologists, actually removing the need to create an initial first sample. If we then look now at product lifecycle management. Product lifecycle management, it really services the heart of the product development process. And this is the biggest technology change that we've seen for a long time. This is due to product lifecycle management being a web-based enterprise technology. An increasing number of retailers and brands are implementing this collaborative enterprise software to manage their design and product development process across a global supply chain. So you can see, in a sense, from the illustrations in front of you that wherever the users are, they can be connected in real time and share the same information. This reduces the time spent on rehandling and rekeying data from one system to another and reduces errors and reworking. The large amount of data in the product development process is therefore more readily managed and shared with this technology, and it can be easily installed wherever the users may be. The important prerequisite is that the overall process is known and shared, and that all users know which activities they require to carry out or manage and when. So the technology cleverly facilitates the process, and the benefits that can be achieved are substantial. So primarily, the major benefit that companies look for is speed to market. So it's not necessarily about being faster, but it's definitely about being on time, and being on time with more complex and coordinated collections. Also, the system allows, as I mentioned, the use of collaborative data sharing in real time and the synchronization of global workflows. This is probably the single biggest gain with product lifecycle management technology, that the critical path is within the system and all users are connected to the calendar and have visibility of their own activities and their own deadlines. But again, one of the major challenges with the supply chain was always the lack of visibility particularly from management. So now the decision makers can see via metrics, KPIs as they're often referred to, what decisions they need to make as a priority in order to be on time. And also, we then find the factory is receiving a more reliable tech back for development and production. And a very important output of this, most importantly, is that there's a better management of cost and resources across the product development supply chain. So given the consumer and market challenges of today and the management required of complex product development process and the need to be on time with consistent products, this type of enterprise technology is increasingly being adopted by performing retailers and brands today. So now we'll have a look at the cutting room. A similar type of approach and benefits are now being sought more and more from a cohesive and collaborative approach within the cutting room. So often when we talk of manufacturing, we simply think of the cutting process, the sewing process, and the output associated with that. But importantly, companies have started to look back up from the cutting process into the actual cutting room. And in the last 10 years, cutting technology has also greatly improved, being quicker and more technically efficient. The introduction of lean processes has also helped maximize efficiencies. So as a result, there's a much greater productivity overall that can be achieved. So in many ways, it's less about having a huge, inexpensive, relatively low-skilled workforce needing to turn out huge volumes, and more about the combination of superior cutting technology with a more skilled labor working on more sophisticated products, shorter runs, and in general managing the collection approach within the cutting room. So it's very important to understand the links between the cutting, the patterns, and the optimization of fabric. This model is more easily found within Europe and close geographies, such as North Africa and Turkey, or similarly in North America and then Central America. And it's the combination of these superior cutting machines with the more skilled labor force that are proving more manageable in the geographies closer to home, because the skill sets are there. And these approaches are being adopted by fast fashion companies looking to manage quicker turnarounds, or companies, for example, who have more upmarket products or luxury products where product development skill sets are important. as is proximity to quality raw materials. So importantly, it's not just about cutting, but also about understanding how it integrates with the related software technologies for patterns, markers, and fabric optimization. And this can all be provided by Lectra today. So when companies take this type of integrated process approach within their cutting room, the benefits are wide-reaching. So we see huge benefits being achieved in fabric utilization, improvements in end product quality with fewer errors in production, a reduction in recuts, little underutilization of equipment, and overall a more effective and efficient industrial process. And this is also helping to drive and optimize the requirement of time to market, because we also see an overall reduction in the pattern development time, and we generate an ability to develop more products in the same time. So, if we then move on and take a look at what that means in terms of expertise, the change in these supply chain processes and in technology can actually seem overwhelming to many companies. Therefore, it's good to know that companies such as Lectra can work in partnership with customers to help and support at each step of the project and beyond. So it's a combination of industry experienced solution experts and skilled consultants who support the introduction and take-up of this technology and help to make the change much easier for the companies involved. So vendors such as Lectra, we like to operate a partnership approach and work with companies before, during, and after their projects. And of course, we have call centers or support centers who will continue to support customers once projects are completed. So if we conclude on some of the key points here, of course, many companies have technology already implemented in their business, but often what we find is it tends to be standalone. We tend to find design systems, but not connected to pattern systems, or some form of product data management, but in no way is it connected either to patterns and certainly not to any form of manufacturing. The game changer is to have integrated technology, covering as much of the company processes as possible based on a shared and optimized in-house process, along with linking, of course, the users and having them trained with the right skills. This is happening often in the sourcing locations that can best adapt to these changes. And so what we're seeing is that many of the companies who are adopting substantially into these supply chain process approaches with technology, they are tending to set it up within the brand center, but optimize it in closer to shore locations to get the full benefit of the speed to market. And ultimately, the visibility of information can leave the choice of which sourcing model and which location to the management. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Judy. We're now going to move on to the question and answer session. We're obviously going to do our best to get through everything in the time that we do have remaining, but any questions that we don't manage to answer today will be followed up by email. We've already had a number come through, and please do continue to keep them coming, and as I say, we'll do our best to answer them for you. So, Judy and Leonie, one of the first questions that came through during the presentations was, do you think manufacturing will come back to the UK to the levels prior to mass offshoring? Leonie, do you maybe want to start with that?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Gosh, in answer to that, I think it's important that we remember that that companies, that retailers, brands and manufacturers have spent the last couple of decades shifting production offshore, and they've been building their relationships with suppliers there. And obviously they've reaped the benefits of lower costs in the process. And in the course of this process, the shift has seen a huge contraction in manufacturing of apparel and textiles in the US and UK. So it's actually very hard to see this coming back in any significant kind of volume. As I said in my presentation earlier, we've lost capacity for large-scale production in these countries. There's a shortage of skilled workers, and high wages are another issue. And there are also questions, I guess, around whether or not buyers are sufficiently committed to a return. They've got a lot of other concerns on their minds at the moment. They're under pressure to maintain profits in the face of rising product costs and falling sales. And it may well be that their focus is going to continue to remain on the global supply base that they've spent a lot of time, energy and resources on building up. I think it's also important to remember that companies have a choice of maybe 30, maybe even 40 low-income countries other than China that they can actually source from, and the likes of Bangladesh, Cambodia, Vietnam immediately spring to mind. I would suggest also in the mix you've got the likes of Indonesia, maybe Thailand, Pakistan, Morocco and Nicaragua. And one of the interesting things is that this isn't a conversation that we'd have been having a few years ago. And I think that's what's so fascinating about all of this, that there has been a change. Sourcing closer to home might not necessarily happen in the US or UK, but these countries are back in the sourcing mix after a long absence.
Judy, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I think that was very comprehensive. I think just to say that I think the answer is, I mean, it won't come back as it was before. I think a lot of that is due to the workforce. I think that, it's not something we particularly went into detail on, but, although the cost to the manufacturer to make in the UK today is becoming again possible, the wages are not there. And I think one of the issues is to attract the workforce. And then the capacity, as Leonie was mentioning, we just don't have the capacity. So it's more likely the trend to continue to closer, as we were saying, the closer sourcing, the near-shoring, as it's referred to, with some increase in the main Western European countries, but not as before.
Okay. One that just sort of relates to that question that's just come through is, what types of companies are choosing to manufacture in the UK? Leonie, maybe you could start.
Yes. I don't think it's realistic to see mid-market or budget retailers sourcing domestically, simply because of the cheaper price points and volumes that their businesses require. In the example of Topshop that I gave earlier, its made in Britain products they're within its more expensive fashion-led, unique and boutique collection. So what we're seeing is a high street retailer that prides itself on low prices, but its domestic sourcing is in its more upmarket lines. And while Topshop says it's increased the number of British factories it uses to 47, to put this into some kind of context, the group as a whole says it uses 700 suppliers and 1,060 factories. So its domestic production really is a drop in the ocean. We are seeing UK manufacturing coming back, and there's been a lot of talk, obviously, over this year. But I think the reality is that it's inclined towards niche products and small runs. Mm-hmm. And those, as we've said earlier, for whom the whole idea of a heritage image, maybe tapping into unique skills and craftsmanship, are actually going to be the key and are going to offset what will continue to be a higher price to produce domestically. An example of a luxury firm that has a lot of production here in the UK is Mulberry, which makes around a third of its handbags in a factory in Somerset, and it's actually planning to build a second factory. And another thing that I came across during my research was a report from the British Fashion Council earlier this year, which was called The Future of Fashion. And obviously it was looking to promote the concept of UK fashion production. But even it had to concede that the areas in which growth was likely to occur would be quality and luxury products that require specialist, highly skilled production.
Judy, one for you that's come in. Are there any tools that allow companies to assess if and when it would be profitable to bring manufacture back to the UK?
I think what, in terms of tools, I mean, certainly through product lifecycle management, companies can better manage the cost, the overall cost of collection development, and link that into manufacturing costs. So I think, once you have the information of your different cost bases, I mean, a lot of it can be managed, in a sense, churned through product lifecycle management technology. But you need, I think, to do that effectively, I think you need to have an understanding of your overall supply chain costs. So taking it, in a sense, from your cost of design, development and manufacturing to know if ultimately you bring back manufacturing, if it's going to be overall profitable.
Okay. So just from that, do many fashion companies have PLM technology currently?
I would say that it is a technology that is very much on the increase in terms of the take-up. I think to say many, it's always a little bit difficult to know exhaustively how many companies have it, but I would say today that a good number, let's say more than half, have some form of product lifecycle management technology. The most common part of it is often referred to as product data management. So there are quite a lot of older solutions out there today which are not necessarily web-based, but still enable companies to have some level of collaboration and some level of data sharing, but ultimately don't go far enough to allow companies to also link it to calendar or even to a supply base. And so I would say that in the more recent versions of full web-based systems that can be used globally, there's probably not so many today, but it is definitely a requirement that's on the increase.
Okay. Leonie, a question for you. How are rising costs in China likely to impact the competitiveness of Western manufacturers?
We've actually got quite a lot of questions coming in, very much along the lines of how companies can balance their production. Is there going to be a migration away from China? So it really is a subject that is generating a lot of interest from the people who are listening with us today. I think it's important to keep everything in context. We've heard and we've reported on Just Style on many occasions that China's government says it wants to double wages by 2015. But even so, we must remember that wages in the US or UK are still 5 times higher than this. And China's got the capacity, it's got the ability to increase productivity. So all of these things have to be taken into consideration. That there was one very interesting comparison that was made in our white paper, and it points out that the UK minimum wage currently is £6.19 per hour, which is roughly equivalent to $9.78. Whereas in Shenzhen in China, it's 13.31, which is roughly equivalent to $2.10. And every other Asian garment making centre is coming in lower than this. So if Chinese wages were to rise as forecast, then that's a doubling by 2015, with annual growth, I think, coming in at around 15%. It would actually take a decade for wages in Shenzhen to match those in Britain. That's obviously if the wages in the UK stay at the same levels. And even if China does get more expensive, there are hundreds of thousands of factories and tens of millions of workers between China and Europe or North America who are all vying for this business. They're all able to make garments perhaps more efficiently than workers in London or LA. So even though we're seeing wages rising around the world, mass garment production in the West actually doesn't make economic sense. And I think it's important to keep hold of that when we're actually looking at this debate.
Anything else on that, Judy, from the Chinese market?
Well, I think China is definitely the dominant player, but of course Asia is the dominant continent. And so, what Leonie's mentioned a lot and what comes out in the data survey, there's a lot of options out there, so okay, maybe not China, but companies can go closer to that area. But I think that the flexibility that close sourcing or nearshoring can give companies is definitely something that's very important to them. I think that in some respects, I would want to add the fact that it's maybe more about playing tunes on your requirements. This is where we see the technology being particularly valuable, because it's not about necessarily, of course, is it China or is it the UK or is it Turkey, but it's the ability to be able to play to the source that responds best to your requirement at a point in time. And I think that's very important. I think that what we're seeing is there's really a level of sophistication in the closer to home supply chain that's becoming increasingly important. And this is in many ways linked to consumer demand. As the low-cost countries become more expensive, there's maybe a question about what's actually going to happen to, let's call it, cheap clothing. And as the consumer becomes more demanding, and companies need to be able to put more detail into product, they need to be able to find the supply chains that can do that for them. So having access to your different collaborators through a collaborative system and being able to mix your sourcing decisions, I think that's going to be increasingly important for the future, because in some respects it's actually very difficult for companies to really predict this easily.
Many thanks to Eric, who has sent in a number of questions. Judy, one of Eric's questions was, we need to have skilled workers, pattern makers, etc. He says that skilled ones will soon be retired, and how to convince new students or people to start this career.
No, I think that's a very, very fair point. And to be honest, it is something that we see, companies raise it often, and it's talked about a lot. I think like a lot of functions in life, that of the pattern technologist, it's probably not been in many ways sufficiently valued. I think that, probably everybody on the call would agree that, design is something today that I would say is a career function that's given a lot more street cred than that of a pattern technologist or a pattern developer. And yet, with many of the brands and retailers who we talk to, and I would say particularly brands, the number of times there is a right-hand man or woman who's a pattern technologist is very impressive, and very important to them. And they know that their brands will suffer if they don't have that person. So Lectra today has a huge schools program, and we spend a lot of time working with schools. We have a lot of our technology available in schools all over the world, both design technology and pattern technology. And there's a lot of work done by us to try and encourage it. But I think ultimately, for me, I think it's one of the things that the fashion industry has to get hold of and has to, in a sense, champion, maybe at Fashion Week or something like that, and really, make it known that a good pattern technologist is worth their weight in gold. Because if the industry doesn't, it's like a lot of things with the apparel industry, they're just going to be the ones who lose out, and not to leave it too late until, none of them are there. But I think, if companies are looking for resources, actually to talk to schools, go talk to the schools, try and find out how they can maybe have access to the graduate year or whatever, because I think it's not an obvious one, and there's definitely, I would say from our experience, I'm not going to say a shortage, but it's a category that's certainly not abundant.
Okay. Seems to be quite an interesting and highly debated area, because I see that Harriet's just sent in the same question along the same lines. So Harriet, hopefully that's answered it for you as well. But Judy, another one that I think is mainly relevant to you as well, has come from Dong, who says, there's been substantial development in terms of integrated technology from planning to designing and cutting. But what about innovative technology? So what about innovative technology for manufacturing, such as sewing and finishing products? It can reduce labour costs if it is a major concern.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'll be absolutely frank on that one. I mean, that is not my area of expertise, and I'm not really in a position to answer on that. I mean, from what I understand, it's really how do they, in the manufacturing process, manage those aspects more effectively, or maybe bring greater creativity. So, I mean, what I would say in terms of, certainly Lectra today, I mean, one of the major forces of Lectra is the manufacturing, the cutting technology. And I think, it's maybe not exactly in the example that Dawn's looking for, but, Lectra, like many technology companies, or like many companies, we don't always have the perfect fit for our customers. And so in that situation, we often take an approach where we will sit down and partner with a customer to develop a version of, and without, I think it's a very good example of innovation, and without giving names away, I mean, we have worked as a partner with one very, very well-known luxury global high street brand to develop technology that allowed them to deliver the innovation in their products that they couldn't do otherwise. They just could not find the technology on the high street, in a sense, to go and buy it from somebody. So I think, it's a very, I don't know if I'm quite tapping into the right aspect of the question, but, in terms of saying, okay, in a manufacturing process, we as a company are looking to do something that we can't find anywhere, talk to us, talk to the technology providers, because it's really as a partnership that companies grow together. Lectra today has over 70% of the French pattern market, and the reason today that our pattern software is so developed is because we worked with those companies to understand what it was that they needed to do and how could we help them. And that's really how the best technology gets delivered.
Thank you, Judy. I just wanted to dip in here to say thank you to Jan for actually helping to answer one of the questions that was raised earlier about skills. And he makes the point that to raise the awareness and willingness of young people to choose the option of a garment making job, we actually need to give them the perspective that this profession again has a future in Western economies, including a change in the image of sewing jobs. And we're certainly seeing work happening here in the UK and also in the US to try and encourage people to see this as a job where they can have a career, where they can use all sorts of skills. I think also one of the problems is actually getting the numbers. Again, at the moment we're talking about such a small quantity of people that it's hard to see how this is going to swell and actually gain the kind of momentum that is actually needed.
Okay, great. We're obviously sort of beyond time, so we'll just maybe do a couple of quick more, a few more questions if you're happy both. But Judy, one maybe for you. What trends are you seeing in terms of investment in new products?
In new technical products, in new technology? Is that the question?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, today I think it's again, we still see a considerable take-up of everything around the pattern room. I mean, that definitely remains a strength for Lectra. I think probably the biggest trend is customers beginning to understand the importance of integrating the different solutions together. So probably in terms of real growth at the moment, it's around product lifecycle management, and it's around the newer technology in the cutting room.
Okay, great. And perhaps the final question, quite a fitting one to end on, but the question's been asked, is it the end of cheap clothing?
Yes, do you want me to start answering that one? Yes, and crikey, that is quite a question. I think the last 2 years has, for the first time in recent memory at least, actually seen the cost of making clothes soar. But I also think it's quite hard to see what more can be cut from the supply chain. Costs in China are rising, costs from other suppliers are going up, and I think the inevitable answer is that Western buyers are paying more for their garments wherever they're being made. And I think, unfortunately, it's a trend that's here to stay.
Anything to add to that, Judy?
No, I would agree. I mean, I think I definitely feel that the mass challenge to always, have the cheapest garment and to drive really sales through volume. My tendency is to think that that's probably we're moving on a bit from that. I think it's partly maybe about cost in the sense, of course, the supply chain, but I think it's partly in terms of the consumer. I mean, of course, price will always remain extremely important, but I think that just the need to constantly buy new clothes, and the cheaper the better. I think that there's a sort of awakening in the market that's beginning to move away from that, and I think that's probably related to many of the things that are happening in society, economics. Obviously in Western Europe we're having economically a more difficult time. I think also from a green point of view, apparently I think it was even the head designer at H&M questioned the fact that people were just literally, prepared to buy things, wear them once and chuck them away. And if we look at what Marks & Spencer's is doing with their swapping, I think there's a realization there about clothing that's probably going to have some influence on habits. So I think there's definitely something happening around everything to do with the price, value, the amount that we purchase that could ultimately have an impact on cheap clothing. But all of that being said, we all know that Primark is continuing to do extremely well. So the jury's out to some extent.
So I'll see you in your local Primark store, hey? Okay, well, I think we've already gone, 10 minutes over our allotted time, so we better bring things to a close at this end. There has been, obviously, more questions than we maybe even anticipated, so we will do our very, very best to get back to all of you individually with regards to these questions, but thanks very much for that. So that brings to an end today's Just Style webinar. I'd obviously like to thank Leonie Barry, Managing Editor of Just Style, and Judy Gennady, Director of Strategic Projects at our sponsors, Lectra Fashion, for joining us today and a really interesting session. But most of all, we'd obviously like to thank all of you who have been listening. Just to remind you again, an audio-visual version of this webinar will be available at www.just-style.com/webinars. And we will also be emailing you all with a link to it along with a copy of the white paper that accompanies today's webinar. Along with the white paper, you'll also be emailed details of how to buy the full report, which is titled, Is There a Future for Garment Nearshoring? And you'll also be able to benefit from a discounted price to purchase that report from attending today's webinar. So thank you all very much, and we look forward to seeing you and hearing you again at an upcoming Just Style webinar. Thanks so much, and goodbye.